All right, so good evening, everybody. I am Mark Dredze. I'm a professor of computer science at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm really happy to do this PhD admissions Ask Me Anything tonight. So the things I'm going to be talking about are most specific to computer science students who are applying to the Center for Language and Speech Processing. Stepping back from there, most of what I say is applicable to people from other departments like ECE who are also interested in the center, or for computer science students in general applying to our PhD program at Johns Hopkins. But beyond that, a lot of what I say will be applicable to PhD students in computer science anywhere and broadly in STEM fields. So I am targeting a specific audience, but I will also be giving some general advice. So if you're applying to other programs, this will hopefully be useful to you as well. The goal really of tonight and doing this is to demystify our admissions process. I know that a lot of people are, curious as to how this works, and how we make decisions and what should be in your application and all that. And I want everyone to submit the best application possible. And the way we're going to do that is by sharing information about our process, what we're looking for, etc. I have a URL up here that is a great resource for answering a lot of questions, some of which I'll be talking about tonight, but there's additional information there. And also everything that I'm recording now, we're going to post online so that you can come back to it later and other people can have access to it. I will be answering questions at the end. If you sent in questions, I will try and answer those as well. And if things come up, you can also put them in the chat window. I believe the chat is enabled. Yeah. All right, so let's get started. So as I said, the goal of tonight is twofold. One is to demystify the PhD admissions process so you understand how we make decisions. And the other goal is to help you write better applications. It is my view that if you write better applications and you present a better picture of yourself, it is good for us because it allows us to make more informed decisions about the admissions process. So I want to talk about a couple of things tonight. We're going to start by talking about Johns Hopkins and the Center for Language and Speech Processing. I think it's a wonderful place to do a PhD, so I want to tell you a little bit about it. Then we're going to talk about our admissions process. Again, this is going to be specific to us, but a lot of what I say is really true of PhD programs in general. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to write a good application. So hopefully that will be useful. And then I'll get to some of the questions that people sent in, as well as common questions that I received. I think we'll be doing this for about an hour tonight, just to give you a heads up of how long this is going to take. Okay, so first, let's start with Johns Hopkins University's Center for Language and Speech Processing. So at Johns Hopkins, we kind of organize faculty obviously into departments, but faculty between departments caucus together to work with each other across department boundaries on research of common interest. And so at Johns Hopkins, we have a center for doing this called the Center for Language and Speech Processing. It's been around since the early 90s, so we're celebrating our 30th anniversary next year, I believe. And we have really an unusually large number of faculty who work in speech and language. These are some of them. I'm not going to go over what they all do. They all have websites. You can look into that if you'd like. But these faculty come from multiple departments. I'm also really pleased to say that we have two new faculty, Daniel Kashabi, who is a first-year assistant professor in computer science at Johns Hopkins, and Anjali Field, who is an incoming assistant professor in computer science. And I will have to find a way to fit those pictures into the previous slide because it's very full. We also have other researchers in affiliated centers. The HLTCOE is one of them. These are additional faculty and researchers who work on these topics. Okay. We also have other programs that are of interest to our students. So outside of the School of Engineering, we have the Center for Digital Humanities, which has a digital humanities program. This is run by Tom Lippincott, who's pictured below. And this is really a fantastic program that many of our students work with in doing qualifying projects and research projects. It's just kind of like another opportunity, another application area for looking at some of the technologies that we develop in speech and language. Another advantage of Hopkins and having a center and having so many faculty who work in this area is our seminar series. So every semester we bring in about a dozen researchers and faculty from across the world. Zoom has allowed us to broaden where we bring in people from, not just the United States now. And this is just, I happen to have this slide. This is our spring 2020 seminar series, but we do this every semester. And this just gives you a taste of the diversity of people from different backgrounds and research areas, institutions that come and talk to us. And one thing I tell students is that if you spend 5 years doing a PhD and going to seminar every week, you're literally going to meet 100 different people in the field. And students take them out to lunch, have the opportunity to meet with them. It's really a fantastic way to kind of be in the center of this really active research community. We also run a workshop series over the summer. Since 1995, we have run this workshop series. It was rebranded a number of years ago as JSALT, the Jelinek Memorial Workshop on Speech and Language Technology, after our founding director, Fred Jelinek. And this is just another fantastic opportunity. Every year we have 2 or 3 teams that come in of academics, industry folk, government researchers. We have graduate students and undergrads. It's a really good undergraduate research opportunity. We get applications from all over from undergrads who want to participate. And a lot of CLSP students will join one of these teams. We organize these workshops, and we've done so for about 25 years. They have talks every week you can go to, and now we rotate them. So every other year we host them at Hopkins, and in the alternate years we organize them and they're hosted somewhere else, but we're the organizing committee for it. We also have an excellent master's program in human language technology. I know you're applying for a PhD program, but what that means is we have a ton of classes that you can take. And so as PhD students, you just have a lot. You won't take all of the speech and language courses. There's too many. But the point is that there's a large number to choose from, not just doing education in terms of research, but in terms of taking classes. Our alumni go on to all different kinds of jobs. We have placed alumni all over the world in different academic institutions, and our former students are professors in some of these institutions and others. We place students in industry as well, and so we have students at all the top companies, and this gives us a fantastic network to help students get summer, internships and jobs when they graduate. So CLSP at Johns Hopkins is really a fantastic institution. If you are interested in speech and language, I highly recommend you apply. Whatever it is about language that interests you, we have someone working in it in that area. We take many students every year, so it should be at the top of your list in terms of places to apply. Even if you're not interested specifically in speech and language, we have fantastic programs in ECE, in computer science, and others. Even if you don't come here for grad school, if you go into this field, you might end up visiting Hopkins as either a workshop participant, a seminar speaker, or something like that. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about Hopkins. Hopefully I've convinced all of you to apply. Let me talk a little bit about the admissions process. And again, what I'm going to tell you is our admissions process, specifically how we run things within CLSP for the computer science students. But much of what I say is going to be true of other departments and other universities. I'm talking to other faculty. Much of the way we do it is the way it's done elsewhere. So let me just say, CLSP takes students every year. Okay, I always get emails asking if we're going to take students this year, and I tell people you should always apply. We always take students. The areas that we take students in does vary by year. So within NLP, we always take students, whether we have students who will be accepted in machine translation or multilingual NLP or semantics, that varies year by year depending on need. I really have no idea what this year will be or what areas we're going to focus in. I did check over the past 13 years, the number of incoming computer science CLSP PhD students is averaging to be 7 with a standard deviation of 4. I think in recent years, it's higher because we have more faculty now than we did 13 years ago. But this just gives you a sense. This is not the number of offers we make. We make more offers, obviously. This is the number of people on average in each class. That can be much higher. It can be a little bit lower. Okay. So what does the admissions process look like? So you submit the applications, and that's when our process begins. The first step is we triage applications. The applications we get to our PhD program are sorted by research area, and you actually indicate your research area when you apply. You have the option of indicating 2 research areas. We occasionally have students who are interested in multiple research areas, and these areas are like natural language processing, security, human-computer interaction, machine learning, things like that. Within NLP, every application is read by at least 2 people. They review the application using a review form where we ask specific questions about the applicant. And then those reviews are made available to all of the faculty. So this does vary a little bit by area, but this is the way we do it within NLP. So your application will be read by at least 2 people. And then all the reviews and all the applications will be available to the faculty as a whole. At that point, the faculty review the applications. They might read the reviews and based on the reviews decide whether or not they want to read the applications. And then individual faculty make decisions about who they think would be a good fit for our program. This is not necessarily a faculty member says, I want to admit this student. This is really just a vote of this person would be good for our program. And people who pass that stage get interviews. We interview every candidate that is offered a spot for admissions. We'll get an interview first. That I think is a little bit different from some universities that might not interview people, but everyone we admit will get an interview. I believe that's true, although I'm sure there's some exceptions sometimes. And almost every applicant will be interviewed by at least 2 faculty members. And those faculty members may not be your prospective advisors. So we really work together to ensure we interview a lot of people. So we work together to ensure that there's enough interviewers. If you get an interview, it is not going to be unusual for you to get an interview from someone who is not a good fit for you in terms of an advisor, but that's fine because we all work together to share feedback on candidates. Based on those interviews, we make decisions for who attends our visit day. The visit day is usually just domestic applicants. So this is people applying from North America because we fly you in and it's not cost effective or time effective to fly people from overseas. So if you're applying from overseas, we will just do the interviews. We're not going to you don't come for the visit day. But if you are in the United States and we decide to invite you, we'll bring you for a visit day. Usually that is an interview weekend. And what that means is when you come, you do not have an offer from us. Instead, we want to meet you in person and interview you in person to decide whether or not you're going to get an offer. After that, we start to make offers in about March, and we do use a rolling admissions process. So what that means is that we will make a batch of offers initially. Whether or not you're in the first batch or second batch or whatever depends on a number of factors. For example, how quickly we make the decision, balancing areas, these sorts of things. We always make more than 1 round of offers. That happens every year. And the way we make more offers simply depends on how the earlier rounds go. So we have a number of slots we want to fill. If candidates are accepting those slots, then we might accept fewer candidates after them, and the areas in which they're filling are going to depend on the next offers we get out there. So generally speaking, we do our best to get offers out early, but it really depends on hearing back from candidates as quickly as possible. Sometimes there's other things that develop during admission season. So sometimes we will find out that we have additional slots or something like that, and that will open up additional areas. So it's kind of a fluid process. I know it takes a while. We try and stay in touch with people that we've met through the visit weekend so that they know what's going on. Okay, so that's the process. In there is the actual review. So what does it mean to review an application? What are we looking for? And I want to share this with you so that you know what to put in your application. So the goal of our process is to find the candidates who excel in research at Johns Hopkins. And actually, let me just say in a moment, the slides you're seeing now are the slides that I present to our reviewers. So when we kick off the review season each year, we have a training session for everyone to kind of refresh what our process is and our policies are. These are some of the slides that I share. So you're actually seeing the directions that we use. This is not a summary. This is what I present. So our goal is to find the candidates who excel in research at Johns Hopkins. So that has two parts: excel in research. So what does it mean to excel in research? We're looking for candidates who are motivated, who are curious, who are hardworking, who are intelligent, and who have technical ability. These are some of the premier things we're looking for. There's lots of other characteristics that applicants have, but I think these are characteristics that people who are really good at research have. And again, this is a PhD. Your job is not to get A's in courses. Your job is to do research. And so these are the sorts of things that we think are characteristic of those who do well in research. And then the other part of that is we don't want people who will excel in research anywhere. We want people who excel in research at Johns Hopkins. And what that basically means is we want people who are well matched to our program. So we consider the research strengths of our program. Our work at Hopkins is very interdisciplinary. Not everything is, but a lot of it is. And so we're looking for candidates who might excel at interdisciplinary work. Candidates with geographic constraints are of interest to us. You know, if you can't move to Baltimore, that's obviously going to be an issue. If you want to move to Baltimore, that's going to be a good thing. These are the kinds of factors we look for. And so it's definitely true, this happens every year, that we get applications from excellent candidates who we know will be accepted into many top programs, and they do not get an offer from us because we do not think they would excel at Johns Hopkins. Okay, so we really take that part seriously. We want people who will do well in our program. It doesn't do you any service or us any service to bring you here if this is not a good fit for you. So how do we find the best students? So kind of the common approach is you find the students with the most accomplishments, and that's a fairly easy to execute strategy because you can kind of list what are the accomplishments of this person, and you do that for us, right? You give us your CVs, you give us your statements, and you'll list all your accomplishments. But we have found this is not a good way of getting the best students, right? So just counting accomplishments, counting numbers of papers, that is not a good way to get the best students. So that approach treats research and your career as kind of like a sprint, right? And what we're doing by counting accomplishments is we're trying to see who's ahead right now. And the reality is that this is not a sprint. If we just look at people and what they've accomplished, applicants who come from different backgrounds, different institutions, are going to have big differences in what they have on their CV, right? Because you have different opportunities. The opportunities you have are going to be dictated by the institution you went to, where you grew up, where you live in the world, socioeconomic factors. But the reality is that most of these differences disappear within a year or two of the PhD. The fact that someone comes into our program with 4 ACL papers versus someone with no ACL papers, within a year or two, they're often in kind of the same place. And so focusing on where they are at that moment is not a very good way of predicting long-term success. Instead, we care more about where you're going to end up. after being at Hopkins for, let's say, a 5 or 6 year PhD, where are you going to be? And that is what we care about. And so we don't want to just think about where you are now and the accomplishments you've had so far. We want to think about what you can achieve in the coming years. So the way we think about this is we want to measure achievement and we want to measure opportunity. How much success have you had, that's achievement, divided by how much opportunity you have had for success, right? So we have students that come from programs that are top-rated universities with amazing research programs. And so students who are at those programs have a lot of opportunity, right? If they've done research with someone who's a leader in the field for 4 years, they of course are going to have a lot more achievements. But we want to take that into account. We won't want to just say, well, this person's done a lot. We want to recognize they've done a lot because of the situation they've been in. We want to compare that person, for example, with someone who comes from a university where maybe there was no faculty member doing research in that area. And so this person didn't get a chance to do research in their chosen field or guided research in their chosen field, right? So that person has had very little opportunity. So we try and normalize the achievements by that opportunity. Again, we don't care so much what you've done, we care what you want to do and what you're going to achieve. And so what you've done is only informative as it informs your ability for doing things in the future. Okay, so how do we review applications? Again, these are the same slides I share with our reviewers. So what's in an application? Okay, this is the order of importance of what's in your application. And this should give you some guidance about how to put together your application. So from most important to least important, letters, your statements of purpose and research statements, your grades, your CV and other miscellaneous information you give us, and your test scores. And I'll go through each one of these in order from most to least important to tell you what we're looking for. So let's talk about letters. So letters are the most important thing. They are also the thing least in your control, so you shouldn't worry too much about them. But let me tell you what they are. So the reason the letters are important is they come from people who know you well and can speak directly to the things we care about. So a good letter writer knows what we want. They know the information that we're looking for. They know you well, and so they can tell us exactly what we want to know. Okay, so that's why it's the most important thing for us. So the things we consider when we read letters are things like, how well does this letter writer know the applicant? Do they give specific examples that show they really know the person, or do they give kind of generic statements? Do they just say the student is self-motivated? Does the student take a leading role? Do they contribute significant ideas? Are there any concerns? Do they have anything in the letter that might suggest that there's potential issues with the student? And then who is writing the letter? Do they know how to write letters from our program, right? So, yeah. So typically students, well, every student has 3 letters. Typically, you have one great letter. That's your research advisor, someone who knows you well. You did a project with them. You know, that's the letter that we're going to read with a lot of attention. You usually have like one weak letter because, let's be honest, you don't know 3 letter writers that well. And the weak letter is usually, this student took my class, they got an A. Okay, that doesn't really tell us any information. It's fine, because that we expect not to know any information there. And then many people have kind of an in-between letter. It might be they have an additional advisor, maybe they did research with another person, maybe it's an intern host, maybe it's a boss. So sometimes you have 2 letters, some research advisors, sometimes 1. But the point is, you shouldn't stress about having 3 great letters, because we know the reality is, especially for undergraduates, why would you have 3 people who know you exceedingly well, know research about you? It's just not common. The other thing to keep in mind, I see a lot of students really, they focus on getting the letters from famous people. They want someone who's like well-known in the field. But if you look at this list, there's a balance here. So if your letter writer is someone who's well-known, who has a reputation for excellence, and that we know them, then we will trust what they say, and that's great. But if they don't know you very well, if they don't have the ability to give specific examples, if they can't actually address the issues we care about, it's not really informative, right? We much rather have a letter from someone who knows you well, even if we don't necessarily know that person, as opposed to someone who is, let's say famous, but doesn't know you. It's also, I sometimes see applicants try and distribute the work to kind of maximize their letters. And I don't think that's the right way to go about it either. We want to see great letters. We are aware that we're probably just going to see one great letter. You shouldn't trade one great letter for 3 average letters. That's not going to help you. Okay, so those are letters. As I said, there's not much you can do about that, but I wanted you to know what we look for. In terms of statements, this is where right now you can do the most to help your application. So a statement is where you speak directly to the admissions committee. It's the only part of your application where you're literally writing to us, okay? So here are the things that we want to understand when we read your application. What motivates the candidate? What do they want to work on and why? And then critical, we want to get a sense of the opportunities that each candidate has had and what they did to make the most of those opportunities, right? So this is where we get that idea of opportunity and achievement, right? We're looking to see what you've done. And then we want to know, did you take an unexpected path? Now, obviously, most of you don't take an unexpected path. That's by definition how the world works. But we have applicants who do unexpected things, right? They might have not have majored in computer science and come to research later, and that's fine, right? Again, we don't care where you've been, we care where you're going. Where you've been is informative to us in that it tells us where you're going to go next, right? And so if you ended up in where you are now in an unexpected way, that's fine. We want to understand that, and this is where you can speak to that and explain how you got to where you are. We want to know what your proposed area of research is, and here we want to know how knowledgeable you are and how much you should know. So if you have published 3 papers in machine translation, you should sound like someone who has published 3 papers in machine translation. You should be making statements that reflect that, right? And what I mean is you make general platitude statements about MT. It doesn't seem like you know what you're talking about in terms of the detail of the field. Versus if you want to do machine translation because you've read a couple papers on it and you've never worked in it, then obviously we're going to expect you to know less about the area. Right? So this is where we normalize your statement based on what we'd expect you to know, given the opportunities and achievements you've had. We do want to know who the potential advisors are, but you don't have to list them all. So when you tell us you want to work in, for example, multilingual NLP, we know who works in multilingual NLP at Hopkins. And so we will make sure those people see your application. And very often, you don't necessarily know who is currently working in an area. We do. And so we're going to go ahead and fill in the blank. So if you apply and you didn't mention, a professor in your application, you still might get that professor interested in your application because of the research areas you've talked about. And then it's important, many of our applications come from candidates who don't know what they want to do, and that's fine. If you're awesome, then we'll want you to come to our program and we'll help you figure out what you want to do, right? So you don't have to have everything figured out. That is fine. Okay, the next most important thing is grades. There's not much you can do about this. Again, like you've got the grades you've got, but I'll tell you what we're looking for. So we don't just look at the top line GPA. That's not super informative. We look at the details. So what school did you attend? Is this a high GPA or low GPA for that school? What classes did you take? Did you push yourself to take upper level courses? How did you do in the CS courses? So we do look through these things. And again, this is also normalized by opportunity. If you went to a school that has a graduate program in NLP, then you're going to have a lot of NLP classes available to you. And we're going to want to see, did you take those classes or not? Versus if you go to a liberal arts college, you might be lucky to have a class in NLP or a class in machine learning. Test scores. So test scores, I actually think this slide is old because the policy has changed. So in the past, test scores were optional for PhD students, and now I believe you don't even submit them, and I'm just not sure. I have to go through this year's application to see. Regardless, whether or not we have them, they are not really useful for us. So we use them basically to fill in gaps. If you have, if you don't have a lot on your record, right? You haven't done research, you don't have letters from that really speak to your research ability. We don't know a lot about your institution, and so we don't know how to interpret your GPA. If all that is unavailable, we might fall back to test scores, but that's very rare. And I think, as I said, we might not even take test scores now. I don't remember. And I should say, it's obvious, we don't do any filtering for test scores, and we don't do any filtering for GPA. Like, no one gets filtered out by those things. That's not at all. Everyone gets a full review. Okay, let me just go through some common misconceptions about PhD programs. Maybe you knew this already, but I occasionally talk to people who believe some of these things, and so I want to just dispel some misconceptions. So first of all, there's a misconception among some that you pay for a PhD. You absolutely do not. At Johns Hopkins and any PhD program in computer science, you get paid. And I'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes, because I'll tell you what more about our compensation. Some people receive the advice that they need to email a professor before submitting an application. This is very tricky advice. It's like one of the most common things I hear. So this, I think, depends on where you are applying. If you are applying to Johns Hopkins, as I said, we take students every year. We get a lot of applications. I don't know how many students who email me about joining my group, about applying. I give them all the same response, and I actually don't even remember who they are, because I'm just going to read the applications, right? So it really is just apply. If you want to come, just apply. You don't need to contact me or anything like that. Occasionally, I get an email with some really specific questions from someone about our program or like their unique circumstances, and I always try and answer those and give details, but that's unusual, right? The vast majority of people, I would say, just apply. You don't need to contact anyone. I think where this rule is different is if you're applying to a program that has a small number of faculty that may not be taking students every year. So at Johns Hopkins, we have a lot of faculty. Even if I don't take anyone this year, someone else will, right? We're always taking students. But sometimes you'll apply to a department where there's like one NLP person. So then it might be helpful to check with them, hey, are you taking students this year or not? And if you're not, there's really no reason to apply. That's where I think there might be value in emailing a professor before you apply. But for most programs, and certainly most large programs, I think you might not even get a response. Okay, overall school ranking matters. It absolutely does not matter. I could say nice things about Johns Hopkins ranking. We are a very, very good university, but frankly, rankings for PhDs don't matter. The only thing that matters, I should say the most important thing that matters, is who's your advisor. And so Johns Hopkins, I can talk about our outstanding ranking, but like what matters is who you're going to work with. We have fantastic advisors. That's why you should come. And if you get into the #1 program, whatever that is in your mind, and another university, and the other university is a better fit for faculty and for the research you want to do, then it should really be, there shouldn't even be a choice. Go to the place that's a better fit. And that's the next one. You need to go to the best ranked grad program. That's absolutely not true. You need to go to the place that's the best fit for you. And I would just say the best fit is not just the academic fit, it's the entire fit. So if you get into a great program and it's in a major metropolitan city and you don't want to live in a major metropolitan city, then don't go there. You will not be happy if you're not in a place that makes you happy. And that might be geographic constraints, the type of environment constraints, family constraints, religious community constraints. Whatever your constraints are, pay attention to them. You don't want to go to a place where you're unhappy, because it doesn't matter how great the program is. If you're unhappy, you're not going to do well. You don't need to do well in your classes in graduate school. I think our students tend to do very well because they're very smart and good at school. But the thing I care the most about is that students are excellent in research, and that's going to override coursework. As I already said, we don't care about test scores, and we don't care about publications. And what I mean by that is, again, we care about achievement and opportunity. If you have worked for 4 years in the lab of someone who is well known in the field, we kind of expect that you've published, right? But if you're coming from a university where you haven't had those kinds of opportunities, or you discovered research kind of late, no, of course you're not going to have to publish. Like, why that you wouldn't have had that chance. So some people think that our programs have like a publication requirement before you're admitted. Absolutely not. We don't have anything like that. So I'm getting kind of the questions at the end. I just want to point out we have an excellent program at Johns Hopkins that I just want to point anyone to in case it applies to them. We have relatively new program. It's starting its second year, the VTSI program. I guess I wrote scholars, which is redundant. So this is a fellowship for students who attend for undergraduate a minority serving institution. That is a official designation. This includes HBCUs, but it also includes institutions where a significant percentage of the undergraduate body comes from underrepresented minorities. This is like 700 universities and colleges in the United States and maybe also Canada. I don't remember, but certainly the United States. You can check if your university is on the list. We have a link to there below. This is a great opportunity because it is a fellowship that covers everything: stipend, tuition, health, everything. It is better than the NSF fellowship in terms of what it provides. You have these things normally provided by your advisor. I'll talk about funding in a little bit, but this is an independent source. And so you basically are free to your advisor, and it is better than the NSF fellowship because the NSF fellowship is only 3 years. This is your whole PhD. The thing to know about this is you must apply for it, and it has a separate deadline. So you have to apply to our computer science program by December 1st. And when you apply, there are some additional questions you have to answer. All this is explained on the website that I've linked to below. And it's just, I pointed out because if you qualify, but you don't know you qualify and you apply late, then you don't get it. So you have to make sure to apply by December 1st, which is 2 weeks before our own deadline for CS. Okay, I'll also say we have a new program this year that I think is really fantastic. It is a mentorship program run by our PhD students. So if you feel that you need some help with your application materials, our students will help you. So you can submit your materials and we will have one of our PhD students read and give you feedback on your materials. And this is just a great opportunity to put your best foot forward and ensure that you have great statements when you apply. That is not a usable link. I realize that. If you go on to JHU CLSP's Twitter account, you will find that we've posted multiple times. The application deadline is in about 5 days. I highly recommend you take advantage of this program. Okay, so I'm going to address a range of questions that you submitted. So these are all questions that came from people who signed up. I changed the wording a little bit or combined questions in some places, but hopefully I will address all the things that were submitted. And then at the end, feel free to type into the chat other questions that you have. Okay, does it matter if we apply long before the deadline or just before the deadline? Do applications submitted earlier have an advantage? So the answer is no. So I kind of said this when I run through the process, but I'll be clear. So we don't touch the applications until after the deadline. We literally don't even start the review process until I think it's like the morning after the deadline. And so it doesn't matter if you've already submitted your application or you submit it like at the last moment. We also are aware, and I'm sure this stresses you out, many of your letter writers submit their letters late. We know this happens every year. We do our best to accommodate this. And what that means is if we look at your application and it's incomplete because it's missing a letter writer, we will set it aside and like put it at the end of our queue and come back to it so that we have a chance to get the letter. If we get back to it and the letter is still not there and it's an important letter, right? I said like, not all your letters are actually important, right? If it's from your main research advisor, that's important. If it's from someone that you took their class, we know it's not really going to contain useful information for us. So we will note that in your review, and faculty, when they look at it, they will see when the review was written, a letter was missing, and they will go back and look at the application and see if the letter is there. So if your letter is a couple days late, it's going to be fine. Please tell your letter writers to be on time. It's kind of a pain, but I don't want you stressing out that if your letter isn't there, the day of the deadline or the day after the deadline, that you won't be reviewed or we'll throw out your application or anything like that. We absolutely don't do that. Summer undergraduate research opportunities. So where do you find these? So I highly recommend students apply. If you're undergraduates, you apply for the JSALT Summer Workshop Program. The application is not up yet. It goes up, I think, around February, but we accept something around 6 to 12 undergrads each year to join workshop teams. These are phenomenal opportunities. A large percentage of the students who participate go on to do PhDs at top programs in our field. Beyond that, we don't have, normally we haven't had for the past couple of years, a undergraduate research program at Hopkins. And faculty sometimes have summer research positions, but they usually go to, I wrote JHU PhD students, that's not right. I meant JHU undergrads. So it's not common for Hopkins faculty to take non-Hopkins undergrads. It does happen, it's just we don't have a formal program beyond JSALT, but I highly recommend JSALT. Do I need to major in computer science? Nope. We take candidates with many different majors. Sometimes it's related majors like math, cognitive science, linguistics, psychology. Sometimes it's things like, English. So we really do take people from all different backgrounds. We care about whether or not you're going to succeed in computer science. So if your undergraduate degree is in English literature, it's hard to tell from that whether or not you're going to succeed in computer science. So there are other ways to demonstrate it. Maybe you've done coursework, it wasn't part of the major, but you did coursework in computer science. Maybe you did research, maybe you did a post-bac, maybe you got a job. There are other ways to demonstrate the success. So you do not need to major in CS to do a PhD in CS. And the same thing is true of EC. You don't need to major in EC to do a PhD in EC. Do I need to publish before applying? I already said this. No, you do not. Every year we reject candidates with many papers. I am really blown away at the number of papers some of our candidates who apply have, and we still don't take some of those people, and we accept many candidates who do not have papers. Again, we care more about how you made the most of the opportunities you had. So if you had the opportunities to publish and you published, that's fantastic. If you did not have opportunities to publish papers, then we're not going to expect you to publish papers. How are different students evaluated? How are master's students, for example, evaluated against undergrads? And again, this is where we use our normalization. So we evaluate you on your achievements normalized by your opportunities. So if you did an undergrad in CS and then you did a master's in CS, you have just done more than someone who's only done an undergrad, which is great. And that's valuable experience. And you have had more opportunity to shine. But we also are aware that you've had more opportunity to shine. And so we might expect you to shine more. And so we don't give master's students preference over undergrads, but master's students have had more ability to demonstrate what they can do given opportunities, right? I don't think in the end result of our process that we bias towards either one of these categories. I'm not aware of that at all. How does funding work? Really important. Okay. So all PhD students are fully funded. What that means is for the 2022-2023 academic year in computer science, our stipend is $43,000 a year, okay? And those are spread out as even payments, 24 even payments. You get paid twice a month. We also cover your tuition, which is a lot, but you don't have to pay for it. Tuition, I think, is about $60,000. You don't pay for that. We do. We cover your health insurance. We cover various other fees. All that's taken care of. you are not going to pay to do a PhD. Where does that money come from? So most students are funded on RAships, and an RAship is a research assistantship. That means that you are working on some funded project with an advisor, and the money from that project, maybe it's National Science Foundation or National Institutes of Health, or maybe it's from a company that gave money. That is what's funding the project. That's what's funding you. You have responsibilities for doing research on that project. It's overseen by an advisor. That's most of our students. We also have TA-ships. This is where the department pays you to TA a class or to teach a class. Every one of our PhD students is required to teach for a semester. So you have a TA requirement. You are paid on a TA-ship while you're TAing. But some of our students, either because they want to or because for funding reasons, they decide to, might TA more than one semester. The last category are fellowships. We have some internal fellowships, like the VTSI program. There's also external fellowships like the NSF, the NDSEG, Google, Meta, lots of fellowships are available. And that means your funding is not tied to any specific activities at Hopkins. This is not a decision that's made when you're admitted, and it's not a decision that's fixed. So most students, as I said, students will all do a TA-ship. So you will almost certainly do mostly RA-ships and some TA-ships, whether that's one TA-ship or a couple, depends on you and what your choices are and the funding. And of course, fellowships, most fellowships don't last 3 years. So you usually have a mix of fellowships and RA-ships, but the fellowships are usually, they're external, they're up to you to get, and we can help. Internal, there's some mechanisms available. Regardless, you will have funding from somewhere. People get funded in our program. Do you have a GRE waiver, fee waiver? As I said, GREs are not required. We do have a fee waiver. So if for financial reasons you cannot afford to pay our admissions fee, we will waive it. You just have to email that link there. And that's it. There's nothing else to say about it. You can get a fee waiver. Our relation to other programs. Okay, so this is a little bit confusing, so it's worth saying something about. We have a lot of people at Hopkins who work with computer science students who are or who have appointments in the Department of Computer Science. Okay, however, not everyone who has an appointment in computer science actually works with computer science PhD students. There's not a rule of like who does and who doesn't. I strongly recommend that you look at that professor's website and see, are they working with CS PhD students? If there is someone that is doing exactly the research you want, and they have a secondary appointment in computer science, but all of their students are in a different department, they probably are not going to accept you through computer science. It's just the way it's going to happen. There's always exceptions, and sometimes people change what they do, but that's generally how things work. And so if you want to work with someone and you want to know if applying through computer science will enable you to work with that person, look who they are advising now. For your research statement, how much detail should we give for our research interests? So there is a balance here. You're trying to do a couple things in your research statement. You are trying to tell us what you want to work on. We are not going to give you the project you pitched. So if you have like an idea and you put in your research statement, that's great. It is almost certainly the case that's not what you're going to work on, but we want to understand what your research interests are. So we want to know if you're a good fit for the projects we have. So that's the first goal, is tell us what you want to work on. The second goal is to convince us that you know what you're talking about. If you've been doing machine translation for 2 years, you should know specific things about the field, and your statement shouldn't just say, I want to work on MT because it's interesting, okay? So there's a balance here. You want to be specific in ways that demonstrate you know what you're talking about, but you're not trying to pitch us your project and your PhD. You're trying to educate us on the types of things that would be of interest to you. We know the projects that are available, you don't. We need to know enough information to know if you'd be a good fit for those projects. The last thing I think your statement should do is give us a narrative. So you have done a lot of things. We don't always know how those things fit together. And sometimes I'll read an application and I don't know, like, when was this person at this school and where are they now and when were they with this company? I don't really understand the ordering here. So you can tell a narrative. You can tell a narrative of the things you've done and how they fit together. That is important. Your story does not need to be in chronological order. Most statements I read are in chronological order. It starts off with undergrad, like, and then does the first research project in undergrad, and then does the internship, and then does like their senior year project, and then does what they're doing now, right? That's fine. You can totally do that. You don't have to. If there is another way to explain your interests and what you've done, maybe a thematic breakdown or like how it shaped their thinking, you can do that. That's totally fine. But you want to help us tie all this together so we get a nice complete picture of you as the applicant. So you want to balance these goals. You want to demonstrate your knowledge and skills and give us the broad strokes of what interests you. Someone asked how many international and domestic applicants we get. So I don't know for sure. I did try and look last year. And I think last year, across all of the PhD applications in computer science, half of our applicants in computer science were applying from outside the United States. Last year was a little bit of a weird year because of COVID, so I don't think that's always going to be the case. I don't know how much it's going to change this year. I just don't know. However, we have a website that's put together by a centralized administration at Hopkins that gives a lot of statistics about our PhD populations. So demographic breakdowns, number of students in each program, acceptance rates. It's really detailed. I don't think it has this information, which is why I added the statement. But if you have questions about like who applies to Hopkins and who gets in and what they look like in terms of the breakdowns of demographics and everything, all that information is available on this website. It's actually really comprehensive. I don't know if I understood this question correctly. So if you wrote this and this is not what you meant, I apologize. How much do you accommodate students with disabilities? So I'll say two things. And again, I wasn't sure exactly what the person was asking. So disabilities in terms of admissions isn't a factor, whether it's learning disabilities or physical disabilities. I don't think we even have access to that information unless you give it to us. It's frankly not a factor. If you've been wildly successful, then you've been wildly successful, and that's fantastic, right? And we want you in our program. In terms of students with disabilities, Hopkins has multiple efforts to ensure that students with disabilities have full access to all of our academic programs. Our Student Affairs Office has a lot of detailed information about this. Rather than repeating it, I'll just point you to their website, and it's fairly comprehensive in terms of the accommodations we provide and the ways we provide students access to our programs. Okay, so those are the questions that that were submitted. I'm happy to take other questions over the chat. You can start putting them in there now if you have any. I can answer questions that are about Hopkins or Baltimore, computer science, CLSP. I can talk about TA-ships or I-ships or funding, courses, the admissions process. I can't answer anything about your specific application. If you have those types of questions about how to prepare the best application, I recommend going through the mentorship program. I can't say anything about the statistics or expectations for this admission season because I frankly don't know. I don't know how many students we're going to accept, how many students we want, the areas. I don't know. And I don't know who's taking students. I haven't asked. So I know people are taking students. I don't know how many students anyone in particular is taking or who is, so I can't answer that question. So happy to take questions. Here's my email and other contact information. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will hang out here for a couple of minutes answering questions. Okay, so someone asked, what is the typical time to graduation for a PhD student? And are there differences between someone who has a master's degree and undergraduate degree? Okay, good question. So if I had to guess, I would guess that our time to graduation on average is 5 years, where it is uncommon for someone to graduate faster and common to graduate a little bit slower, like 5.5, 6 years. That's my guess. It does vary, I think, by advisor and things like that, but I think in my research group, 5 years is the average. But what about people who come in with master's degrees? So here's what a master's degree gets you. It's the first thing it gets you is you don't have to take as many classes. So our PhD students are required to take a certain set of classes. Those students who take those classes will be awarded a master's degree from Johns Hopkins. If you've already gotten a master's degree in computer science, you will walk in with a transcript and say, here are the classes I've taken. I should be able to get out of the following classes. Depending on the degree you have, you will either get out of some or all of the classes. So for example, if you have a degree in computer science from a peer institution, you will probably get out of most or all of the classes because you have similar distribution requirements. If you have a degree in computational linguistics, you will probably not get out of your systems requirement because you probably haven't taken a graduate systems class. So you will end up taking, I don't know, let's say 2 classes in maybe like systems or theory or something like that. Okay, so you save a bunch of time in that regard, but that's kind of like the official coursework time. The real time is spent doing research. So it depends. We've had students who come in from a master's knowing what they want to do. They hit the ground running. The first paper they write is the first paper that goes into their thesis, and they graduate quickly, and they can graduate in, let's say, 3 years. That certainly happens. Some of my students have been in those cases. We have other students who come in and they don't need to take classes, but they don't really know what they want to do. They're kind of starting fresh. They're doing new research areas, and they kind of go through the normal 5-year research progression. And so it takes them longer. So it's not like an undergrad institution where you kind of trade classes for graduating faster. There is a trading of classes and getting out of that requirement, but most of it is research, and that's really up to you and the details of what you've done before. Another question. Can you speak briefly about the state of the market, both academic and in industry? I am interested in NLP both for translation and for extracting meaning, sentiment from text. How does this compare to the market for, say, computer vision or other big data fields? Okay, this is a challenging question. So what you're really asking me is what the field is going to be like when you graduate, because that's going to be much more informative to your job prospects. And that I have no idea. I can look at the trends, but it's very hard for me to predict what's actually going to be the case. I can say that right now, NLP translation, NLP sentiment, extracting meaning, these are all super hot areas. Computer vision is also a super hot area. I think that like choosing between those doesn't really matter in that they both are highly in demand. And so you should pick between those, whatever most interests you, frankly. The past couple of years, the industry market has been very, very good for students graduating. Our students get multiple job offers. They frankly get really good compensation packages. They have their choice of where they want to go work. It's really phenomenal. And then academically, it's been phenomenal as well. The hiring market for academia is very favorable to people, to the students. Most students get multiple, I shouldn't say most students. Students who do well get multiple offers, and departments are really, I think the departments really struggle to hire enough people because there are a lot of departments hiring and not enough applicants who are of the caliber to get those faculty jobs. I think you are aware, as well as many people are, that the market seems to be turning. There's been a lot of layoffs recently. I don't know what that means in 6 months from now, and I don't know what it means in 5 years from now. I still think it's a great time to be going into the field. I still think it's a very hot and in-demand and growing field. I do think there's a slowdown right now. For students graduating right now, it will be challenging. But for all I know, in 6 months, things might pick up again. It's hard to say. Okay. Someone asks, if I've done something that could boost my application, like a paper or a presentation or something, but it happened after the deadline, can I send it to the committee that will evaluate my application? You can, and people do. I don't think it matters, and I'll tell you why. So the most common case I get of this is someone who, when they submitted their application, they submitted a paper to, let's say, ACL, and then after they submitted their application, the paper got accepted, and they want to let us know, hey, my paper got accepted. So that's not very informative for us, I think. And the reason is because that is us outsourcing our review to 3 anonymous reviewers. So we already know what the paper is about. We already know you submitted it. Very often you gave us a copy of it, or you certainly summarized it in your statement. Your letter writers talked about it. The only information you're giving us by telling us it got accepted was 3 anonymous reviewers thought it was above threshold. We trust our own judgment. We can read the paper and make our own decision and decide if it's good work or not. So I don't think it really helps. If there is something that wasn't even on the table, like you didn't even know there was going to be a paper before you submitted the application, and then you wrote a paper, got it submitted and accepted, that's new information, but that's very unlikely because the amount of time that passes between when you write your application, submit it, and when we review it. So that's very unusual. Things that are useful is funding. So if you are awarded a fellowship, that is useful to us. So many of our students receive the NSF fellowship. That happens fairly late, and you can tell us when that happens, but also we look because we are always curious who got the NSFs every year. But there are a lot of other fellowships that our students get, whether it's other governments or private fellowships. So those are informative because it doesn't change our assessment of the quality of the application. So if we don't think someone is good enough for our program, then the fact that they're free isn't going to change that. But it does factor into the number of slots. So for example, someone is very, very good, and we think they're very good, and we'd like to take them, but we don't have any slots in that research area that year. Then they're not going to get it. But if we find out that they have funding, and therefore funding is an issue, that might make the difference. It's not a guarantee by any stretch. Sometimes we just don't have the capacity. It's not a funding issue. But if you do get funding, that is something that's useful for us to know about. Okay. Hopkins requires a personal statement in addition to a statement of purpose. Would you give some advice for good personal statement essay, for example? What points does the committee look for in this personal essay? Yeah, so this is a very good point. So some universities separate out your statements. This is now increasingly common. So Hopkins, I think, has a research statement and a personal statement. So the research statement is mostly what I addressed before. The things that you're interested in research-wise. You're interested in the field. Show your knowledge, all that stuff. The personal statement is really just a chance to get to know you a little bit better. Like, what drives you as a person? What personally is interesting to you about the field? What are the challenges you've had to overcome in your life, right? What are the things that motivate you? So this is kind of taking your research interests and putting them aside, just speaking to us about yourself. And people write lots of different things. People will write about specific challenges that they have faced in their life and how they've overcome them. People will talk about how they do outreach or support or passion projects, things that they're really passionate about. We've had some really interesting people who applied to our program. We had people who played on national sports teams, like they played for the sports team for their country. They're nationally recognized for musical skills. Just we've had lots of really different and interesting people apply. And this is kind of, I mean, not everyone, that's kind of some extreme cases. Most people, that's not you, right? But the point is, like, it helps us just to get to know you a little bit better. And so if there are things you want to tell us about yourself, whether it's hobbies or who you are as a person or what's important to you in your life, your motivation, whatever, that's what goes into the personal statement. Okay, are there any other questions? Let me give people another minute or two to think and write, and then we will wrap up. How much math and programming do you need? So for math, it's gonna be highly varied. There isn't a minimum. So we have some students that have undergrad degrees in applied math and statistics, right? So they have tons of math, fine. We have some students that have undergrad degrees in non-engineering fields, and then they might have like a minor in computer science or a minor in linguistics. They're gonna have very little math. So there isn't any specific amount we're looking for. It a little bit depends what you want to do. Like if your application is you want to do like mathematical foundations of deep learning, then you're probably going to need some math. If you're interested in doing things that are, computational social science, you probably don't need math as much. So you'll take math here, don't worry. But like, we're not going to look for that as much. In terms of programming, there's no requirement of like, you have to know certain languages or anything like that. Like, I don't even think, we certainly don't pay attention. That's not important. We do like to know if someone's like a strong developer or not. Sometimes that matters. So we might have a project where we want someone who is, the person is going to work as part of a larger team, building a complex system and doing system integration. So for that, we want someone who has demonstrated that kind of experience. And so if you have, that's useful. But if you haven't demonstrated that experience, you probably don't want to do that kind of work anyway. So there isn't like a minimum amount of programming. Generally speaking, our students come into the program knowing some programming. We do occasionally have students who take an undergrad programming class just to get up to speed a bit more, because they might not have had a very strong programming background coming in. But usually people know how to code to some degree. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying to do a PhD in computer science. That might have been learned through a formal class. It might just be that they taught themselves through other things. There's no programming entrance exam, or we don't do anything like that. Any other questions? If the applicant is from the arts and humanities background, what qualities would make application reviewers to consider him or her a good candidate? So first of all, it depends what they want to do. So if you are applying to do digital humanities, right? That's the kind of NLP you want to do. Then if you have an undergrad degree in classics, that's fantastic, right? That's going to give you a huge advantage. If you're coming in to do something that is, you're coming in to do, like some, deep learning optimization, then that's not going to be, a classics undergrad degree is not going to be useful. So what we're looking for depends a lot on what you want to do. I think one way we look at it is you are going to receive a computer science education. So we're very good at teaching computer science. If you are a good student and you are able to learn and you have demonstrated an aptitude for the topic, we are good at teaching you, right? And so what we're trying to look for is if someone will do well in that. So we've had students who've come in with more humanities or social sciences backgrounds, and we want to see, like, do they have research experience? All the other things I said earlier, like, are they creative and self-motivated and a hard worker? And All those kinds of things, like we look for that. Generally, they have research experience, and so we're looking at that. Do they have a clear idea of what they want to do, right? So you can tell when someone who has not gone a computer science undergrad education has nevertheless kind of done their research and learned about the field. And I don't mean they say like, I took the Coursera class. We have lots of people take the Coursera classes in NLP and machine learning, and that's great. They're very good classes. I'm not knocking them at all. If you've done that or you're interested in doing it, that's fantastic, right? But the point is that we want to see that you've learned something. We want to see that you have understood the field, you've learned about it, and there are people who are very smart and they do that kind of research on their own and they demonstrate the success in their application. So there's not like a specific formula. It really depends on the kind of work you want to do in the background you've had. I would say that most of the time, students who are coming from arts and humanities backgrounds want to do something that is more aligned with those kinds of backgrounds in their PhD. Not always, but oftentimes they do. And we've had phenomenal PhD students with those backgrounds. I'm not going to name names, but I can think of specific cases of people who are fantastic students who have graduated out of our program who came in with non-CS backgrounds. Let me see. Okay. Do research scientists and CLSP take students? And notice their names are not available on the faculty of interest section on the online application. Okay, good question. So first of all, the faculty of interest section is not complete. And we know it's not complete, and that's fine. So I already mentioned that even if you don't list someone as of interest to you, they might still see your application, right? Because we kind of know who's interested in taking students and we know their research areas. The research scientists in CLSP, it varies which one of them takes PhD students. Some of them, absolutely they do. They have multiple PhD students. Others will co-advise students. So they don't necessarily take students themselves, but they will work with students in the program, and others don't. And there's not a rule for this. Honestly, the best way to check is by looking at their websites. So if you look at specific faculty websites or research scientist websites, it should say if they are taking students. And not if they're taking students, but if they work with students, right? So what students they work with. Most of them have websites that say that. So that's a good way to know. But again, you don't have to say something specific. So like, I know last year, for example, we had a research scientist who wanted to take students, and people, they weren't in the faculty of interest form. So no one said they want to work with this person, but that's fine because we know what the person works on. They're part of the admissions process. They just accepted students with us, right? And that was fine, right? And so even though the students didn't say they wanted to work with that person, they ended up being advised by that person. In terms of incoming professors and not available on the faculty of interest, so they should be. I thought that had been fixed. If it has not been fixed, don't worry, you can still apply. I think you can actually write in someone's name, but even if you can't, you can mention them in your statement. So we have an incoming professor and a current professor. Actually, we have multiple incoming professors, just one specifically in NLP, but we have another one in HCI that does stuff with text. So I thought we had added them to faculty of interest, but now I'm going to go double check that was done correctly. Okay, so someone says that they can see Anjali and Daniel, so good. But even if you don't see them, that doesn't mean they're not taking students or anything like that. It's just that doesn't always get updated correctly. If I'm targeting a research area, but you don't have a slot for the research area and I have a good application, do I get rejected? The short answer is yes. So if you come and say, I really want to do, I don't know, I'll make something up. I really want to do machine translation of low resource languages. And that particular year, no one is accepting students in that area, then you're not going to get in. Usually people are not so specific though that they get kind of ruled out, right? Meaning if you're a really good applicant and we're taking MT students in general, we might still talk to you and say like, would you be interested in these other things, right? Sometimes it's mutual. Like sometimes they'll talk to a student and they'll be like, no, I really want to do this thing. And so we'll say like, okay, well, we're not doing that thing. So it just doesn't make any sense. So I really wouldn't worry about like targeting an area and then, kind of getting yourself thrown out or something like that. Just tell us what you're interested in. And if we think that we can find a good project for you, then we will. And if we don't think we can, then you don't want to come, right? Like if we don't have any good projects for you that fit your interests, your response shouldn't be, well, I'll change my interests, right? Like tell us what your interests are and do those things. And if it's not a good fit, then it's not a good fit. Things do vary a lot by year, right? So we have some years where we happen to take a lot of students because we have a lot of funding. Some years we don't. It's just the way it goes. I can tell you that when I applied to graduate school, the place I went for graduate school had a lot of funding the year I applied. I got in. The next year, they had very little funding and like less than half as many students were accepted. Had I applied a year later, I would not have gotten in. And it's just the way it worked out. Any other questions? Okay. So do I expect an email if I get rejected? Yes, you will be notified when you are rejected. I will tell you that it sometimes takes a while to get an official email because we do rolling admissions. So we might get out offers and not send out any rejections for a while because we make additional offers. We do try to get rejection emails out as soon as we can, but we do it in a batch. So it means that we wait till we have kind of almost everybody that we think will be rejected, and then we send it out. So generally speaking, if you, and this is, I think, true of most universities, if you don't hear back from the university for quite a while, that probably means you're not going to be accepted. I say probably because it has definitely been the case that we have contacted people for the first time in March and done interviews. But it's less common. How should we prepare for an interview from CLSP if we get one? So I can tell you for the interviews I do, how I expect people to prepare. So I actually tell people ahead of time what my questions are going to be. And I have the same 3 questions for everyone. Maybe I'll change them this year, but this is what I usually ask. My first question is, pick something you've done and tell me about it. Number 2 is pick something you want to do and tell me about it. And number 3 is tell me what you want to learn in grad school. Those are my 3 questions. And then when you tell me about what you've done, I will ask lots of questions about it. And what I'm looking for is you should be a master of the things that you have done. And so if you tell me about a project you worked on, and I ask you what I think might be a straightforward question, you don't know the answer, that is a good tip off that you don't know much about it. Versus if I ask you questions and we have a conversation about it, it shows me that what you have done, you really understand it and own it well. So there's not really anything you can do to prepare. I don't expect you to like study the things you have done. If it's an older project and you don't remember some details, that's fine. I always forget details if it's an old project. But that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not going to ask like, how long did it take to train that, right? That's not the sort of thing I ask. I ask about the ideas. But those are the 3 things I ask. I think some faculty will do more like coding or algorithm style interviews. I don't do those. If you receive an invitation to interview, you can certainly ask the person who sent it to you, what should I do to prepare? And they might tell you something different. But that's the style of questions that I ask. Okay, I'll wait another moment to see if there's any more questions. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for coming and participating, especially those who asked questions during the session or sent me questions ahead of time. I'm very glad we got to do this. I'm hoping this was helpful to you. We will post this recording so that it will be hopefully a resource for people this year who didn't get a chance to attend, but also people in future years. And again, our goal is just to demystify the process a little bit and help you put forward the best application you can. So I wish everyone the best of luck with your applications this year. I hope you have a low stress process and a successful process. And wherever you end up going next year, I wish you the best of luck and a wonderful start to a career in our field. Thank you.